introduction, and I welcome you all to the second annual International Political Economy Conference. And we're holding this conference in Miami, and many people were asking me, actually my colleagues here, so how come this partnership between GIDIS and FIU? So because, well, as Rebecca mentioned, I'm returning to my alma mater, and so I'm a graduate of FIU. And when we had this idea at my university last year to organize an annual conference on international political economy, we thought about partnering, of course, with my institution, my university here at FIU, and I mentioned this to Marcus, and he was very happy. And so we held last year in partnership with Leeds Metropolitan University, the first one in Izmir, and this idea actually was growing when we were in Izmir. We were talking about holding the second one. Where should we hold it, in Miami or in Leeds, because Leeds Metropolitan is also another partner of ours. And Marcus and Rebecca extended this idea to us and said we can do it here in Miami, I was just so delighted, because it's always good to come back to Miami. And I'm very happy that we partnered, and hopefully we can have longer partnerships, and we can have the maybe 4th, 5th, 6th of these conferences in, interchangeably in Izmir, in Leeds, and also in Miami again, because it's, as I said, I spent almost 10 years here, and those were the best years of my life, and it's always great to be back in Miami. And I would like to thank Marcus Thiel, Rebecca Friedman, and Christine Kelly, and all others for this organization. Everything is perfect, and you worked really hard, and you didn't even ask our input. We didn't really do much to help you guys out, but you organized everything very well. And with my colleagues, we thank you very much for this organization. And I would like to welcome you all, and we will have our own presentation after this panel, and then we will also give a brief presentation about our university. So I'll just stop here and let the floor to the presenters, and have a hopefully nice and productive day. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask the three presenters this morning to limit their comments to 15 minutes so that we can have some discussion, because I think they already know what they're going to say, but they'd like to know what you think. That's very important. So I'm going to follow the schedule in order and start with Dr. Palina Prysmakova, who is Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics and European Politics in the Department of Public and Administration Affairs at George Mason University in Washington.
Hello everyone, good morning. First of all, I really want to thank Rebecca, Gaia, and Marcos for inviting me. This is my second conference, so I'm proud of it. And thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. So in terms of how is it that my paper is connected to the overall topic of the conference, it is important to say that this presentation that I'm going to give out today, it is related in terms of how is it that we can think about innovation in the policy area of labor market policy, but more specifically from the institutional perspective. So the title of my presentation today is Between Equity and Flexibility, the Tensions Surrounding the Decentralization of Social Policy Powers. And more specifically, this presentation is grounded in a bigger book project in which I explore the reconfiguration of labor market policy in 4 European states and also the United States. And in the book, I'm mainly interested in understanding on the one hand, how is it that different states introduce flexibility in the implementation of labor market policies, but on the other hand, how is it that states also try to create unified policy approaches, so this tension between flexibility and having equity on the other hand. But this is a topic that you're going to see what I mean in the following slides. So this citation here is from Mitt Romney from the last presidential debate, and I think it truly illustrates the notion of one of the notions that I wanted to explain here. So he said, the states can care for our own poor in so much better and more effective way than having the federal government tell us how to care for our poor. One of the magnificent things about this country is the whole idea that states are the laboratories of democracy. Don't have the federal government tell everybody what kind of training programs they have to have. Let states do this. And by the way, if states get in trouble, the federal level could step in and see if it could find a way to help them, right? So the idea is that this resonates with all the literature on federalism, for instance, or devolution, decentralization, that really puts forward the idea that by providing subnational levels and local governments with more flexibility, policies can be brought closer to the people, and in that way, these subnational and non-governmental actors can offer a repertoire of locally tailored and personalized policies and services, right? So if these policies are brought closer to local and individual circumstances, then the idea is that then we can really experiment with different policy approaches, and in turn, you can create more innovative policy approaches. And of course, this is not only relevant for the case of the United States. In the case of the European Union, what I found in my previous work, that I did work on the European Employment Strategy and the Structural Fund, is that since the end of the 1990s, the beginning of the 21st century, not 20th century, 21st century, the European Union really pushed for the idea of providing local governments and subnational governments with more autonomy, flexibility, discretion in the management of different labor market policies. So from there, they can be more innovative, bring these policies closer, create new policy solutions, etc., etc. But this, of course, fits within bigger international trends. For instance, you have the OECD that also really promoted for decentralization of labor market policy. So in the case of the European Union, what I found in my previous work is that through the EUCE, the European Union really pushed that idea, but then as Valerie mentioned yesterday, this was really implemented through the use of the European Structural Fund, right? Through the use of the European Structural Fund, you have the subnational levels and the local governments are really able to innovate or at least experiment with different labor market policy approaches. However, this sounds very nice, but in the book, what I say is, okay, you can really promote decentralization, but that can also have many negative externalities for the welfare state, since that's a policy area that I'm interested in. Because it can challenge, the process of decentralization can really challenge the solidarity and equity goals of the welfare state. Why is that? Well, basically, let's say that you live in Italy, and someone in Naples has a set of benefits, duties, and obligations that are very different from someone that lives in Venice, right? So by itself, that challenges the notion of inter-regional solidarity. So what I find is that states really struggle with this tension between flexibility and equity, and they always try to find a solution to this problem, but of course, they do it in different ways. But generally speaking, what I find is that in most states, the central level is involved in different ways, trying to promote standardization. So in that way, for instance, It is involved in the monitoring process, so the regional levels are more or less in tune when it comes to what type of policies they have, right? They put in place. But also they use all different type of instruments regarding how to enforce the policy line, and I'm gonna talk about that later on. So in the end, by being involved, as Mitt Romney didn't want the federal level to do, right? Then in the end, we're trying to reduce fragmentation in the welfare state or in a policy area, and also reduce regional gaps. So this is an interview from in Italy that I conducted in 2009, and this really illustrates the point. It is a task that should be assumed by the state to carry out activities and implement measures that are called azione di sistema, meaning to allow the national system to be homogeneous, to operate in an analogous manner so that citizens who are born in the south or in the north have equal opportunities. Until a part of Italy does not function adequately, people who are born in that part of Italy either emigrates or lives poorly, and this is unthinkable within the national state. So, this really illustrates this notion of interregional, going against interregional inequality is really unacceptable from the perspective of that person. So, in the book, as I said, I'm really interested in understanding how is it that they solve the tensions between equity and flexibility, and I go through 5 countries in details in the book. More specifically, I study Italy, the United States, Spain, United Kingdom, Germany. If you want to talk about the case selection, I can do that later on. In terms of the data, I conducted about 80 interviews or 90 in these countries, with the exception of the United States. And also I conducted detailed case studies, so I went to the reports, etc., etc. But more specifically, I look at the policy area of labor market policy and active labor market policy. So what are the trends? So in the book, to capture how is it that the states change their configuration, what I did was to look at different transfers of powers, both decentralization and centralization, because I found that normally it's not a unidirectional process, it's a two-way process. And then I disaggregate these transfers of powers by looking at fiscal, political, and administrative shifts, right? So the first trend that I found is that fiscal decentralization, at least in the policy area of labor market policy, was extremely rare. From the 5 cases, only the United States engaged in fiscal decentralization with the change to block grants. But for the rest, all the European countries, the central level retained those powers, mainly to first promote equity or redistribution, but also to try to push for a uniform policy line, right? Saying, okay, using money as sticks and carrots. If this is an incentive, if you implement this policy, you will get money. If you don't, then you don't get as much money, right? Then, in addition to that, I also found that political decentralization is also a rare form, not as rare as fiscal decentralization, in part because you need to have legislative bodies at the subnational level, but still, in the case of Germany, United Kingdom, and Spain, all of these countries had legislative bodies at the subnational level, and still they didn't decentralize those powers, those political powers. Why is that? Well, again, because these countries really recognized that having that protecting equity was really important. So, in terms of another important trend, is that in all the countries you see that the level of discretion and flexibility increased in different ways, but still there was more. If you look at what happened between the 2000s, mid-2000s, all these countries introduced reforms. For instance, in Germany they changed the constitution, in Italy they changed the constitution, in Spain they passed legislation to provide subnational levels with more powers in the implementation of labor market policy. And as I said, the nature of these changes and the extent are very different because ones are more extensive than the others. Of course, the United States has on one hand in terms of providing more powers to the subnational level, and Spain and the UK are on the other side, especially the UK, because the UK didn't really decentralize. It decentralized by providing non-governmental actors with more discretion, and this is a trend. This is important though. The most common way of introducing discretion has been by really providing non-governmental actors with more powers. So this outsourcing type of model. And as I said, this is not a unidirectional process. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, so it's not a unidirectional process, and there's a typo there, sorry. So in the case of Spain and the UK and Germany, what we see is that the national level still plays a determinant role from the political and the fiscal perspective. So mainly these countries have introduced administrative decentralization. And in the case of Germany, it's really fascinating because what happened was that in the mid-2000s, with the Hartz reform more or less, the Germans realized that the welfare state was extremely fragmented because the municipalities had all the powers when it came to active labor market policy. So they said, you know, how we need to make it more standardized if we want to implement activation, because people in one place cannot have different obligations and different rights. So we need to involve more the federal level in this task. And they actually, it was very controversial because they had to change the constitution at some point, because the constitution said that the federal level cannot intervene at the same time in the policy powers of the municipalities. And then they said, well, in the case of labor market policies, it's an exception. They can act together, in part to allow for that flexibility, but also to allow for standardization at the same time. So this quote from an interview in the UK really illustrates. What we're seeing is this battle within government about how it can get some of the added value of localism, but at the same time keep a strong centralized steer within national prescribed programs, a national determined benefit system, nationally determined set of rights and responsibilities that come with different benefits. Right? So in terms of the conclusions and the implications for the overall topic, is first of all, is we hear all the time that policy powers for social policies have been decentralized, and this is not only related to the post-industrial states, for instance Canada, the United States, but also if you read China, Argentina, they follow the same type of trends. But I argue, well, you really need to understand how is it that the subnational and the national level are connected, because sometimes it is decentralization, but actually the national level plays a very important role in controlling what is happening at the subnational level. So it's not complete autonomy, discretion, etc., etc. And this is a more normative way in terms of how I think about this. I think that if we really want to promote innovation and promote equity at the same time, I think the best type of model, and also the empirical data seems to suggest that that's the trend, then states should decentralize from an administrative perspective, so it provides more discretion, but the subnational levels, the national level, should intervene by providing the fiscal incentives and the political policy line. So this is the type of policy that we want to have. For instance, in Italy, you have extremely high levels of fragmentation, because what happens is that the national level say, yes, we're going to implement, and we're going to push for a policy line, but it's so weak that all the interviews said, no, the national level basically exit this policy area. So now you have that in one place there. At some point, some regions implemented laws and some others didn't. So there were active labor market policy systems in some places and not in others. So this is really important. Now, in the case of of the European Union, also what I find is that if innovation really wants to be promoted, then it has to be supported by the European Structural Fund. Because, for instance, in the case of I did interviews in Spain, many people at the local level say, well, with the process of decentralization, what has happened is that the meso level gained all the power. We lost a lot of power, so the resources provided by the European Union really allow us to experiment with new policy solutions, something that it happened a lot before, but now it's more constrained given the process of decentralization. So this is kind of interesting because it shows that decentralization can actually take away powers from the local level. It depends on the model that is implemented. So, oops, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so perfectly on time. You set a very good example. Our next speaker is Palina Prysmakova, who is a PhD graduate student in politics and international relations here at Florida International University.
Public administration.
Yes.
She's in public administration?
Unfortunately.
Oh, we
New program is already available.
Oh, okay,
PhD
Department of
candidate
Public Administration. A little institutional tension.
Still SEPA school, so I'm at home.
This is all about local versus more
Right.
levels of governance.
Right. Since already mentioned public administration school, will I be correct saying that majority of us here are working for public sector? No? How many private sector people? One? Both? Okay, yeah, but at least we are involved in public sector, right? Okay, good. So my name is Palina Prysmakova and I'm from Belarus. And it's so nice to be here surrounded by people who do research on Europe, so it won't take a lot of time to explain where my country is. Believe me, it's not a usual situation in American conferences. There usually I quote the ex-candidate for Belarusian presidency. He travels a lot, Alex his name, and whenever he tries to explain where we are located on the globe, he says, do you know where Russia is? So, Russia is this country located between Belarus and China. Alright, so we are not going to talk today, unfortunately, about Belarus and about China, even though it's another topic of interest of mine. We will mention Russia, so those who do research in Russia should be happy at this point. And I would love to start again, because Dr. Valery mentioned yesterday that do we keep it like this? I'm just really feeling comfortable. All right. So as Dr. Valery mentioned yesterday, that we are here to create successful economies and successful societies, which I would say absolutely impossible without proper labor force. So I think that's the topic of the panel as well, job creation. Creating jobs with decent salaries, I would say, is necessary for economic growth, but simply putting people in places will definitely decrease unemployment rate, but will not necessarily assure development. So proper people in the proper places will do it. So I'm here to talk about quality job creations and how to get this maximum out of employees and how to motivate them to work. So, why do you work? Was it really this 50 inches flat TV screen that woke you up today at 5 a.m., put you in the car, and stuck you for 2 hours in traffic? And what is the most important, is it the same on the other side of Atlantic? Different countries there. So, the truth is, yes, to some extent it is, but some people value it more, and some people value it less. And these people who value it less are we here, involved in public sector. So the topic of my presentation is testing the public service motivation across different European countries, and the series public service motivation, meaning that people who work for public sector have this little spirit inside that tells you you should go and help others. You actually get this enjoyment of feeling of fulfillment when you see that you do something for your society. The road is built, the school is open, It's not that you do not value monetary values, of course, it's important, but public service motivation, as the last quote says, is this reliance on intrinsic over extrinsic rewards. So research question of my paper, does personal wealth matter, or is it important to help others? So there are two hypotheses. First says, yes, public service employees more than likely, more than private sector, act because they actually want to help others. And the second hypothesis, first that they value monetary interest less, and the second one, that they want to help others, more than private. Statistical methods. I do use European Social Survey, I bet you're familiar with this database. 2008 to 2012, I just put all the answers together. I got very beautiful number of observations, 38,000. And I conducted a multivariate ordinal logistic regression. So, European Social Survey currently involves 26 countries. When I put everything together and ran a regression, it proved all the hypotheses, but it's not interesting. We just know that all people in Europe, yes, it's true. Public employees are interested in helping, they're not interested in money. If I would here to run 26 countries multiplied to 50 regressions, we'll be here till dinner, I guess, or lunch at least. So for the sake of saving your time and my time, I grouped countries, and I used EU or belonging to EU as a major factor to group them. So the first group is the European Union funders, Belgium, France, Germany, Netherlands, 7,000 observations. Second group is those who joined the EU before 2004, so-called all the EU countries. Some of them are so that they're about to resign, like Great Britain, or they're very sick, like Greece. Okay, the third group is the new European Union members that joined after 2004, mostly countries from the former Eastern Bloc, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, all these countries. Another 9,000. Number 4, Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, I only have here Russia and Ukraine. I would love Belarus to be here, but we do not report information to European Social Survey. Number 5, those who are too selfish to be part of the European Union. Forgive me if somebody's here from Switzerland and Norway. And the 6th one again, there are people here from Turkey, so I apologize a lot. So I grouped these 3 countries that actually cannot be grouped together, but since the data was there anyway, so the last group is very artificial, since I already have the data, just to run the regression for regression's sake, more for curiosity than for significant results. Alright, so please forgive me for the number 6. Dependent variable, as we mentioned, is it important for you to be rich? Is it important to help others? Of course, we think about ourselves much better than we are. So this skewness, this all respondents together actually shows us that 1 is very important, 6 is not important at all. So we tend to say that money is less important for us and that we want to help people. But I use ordered logistic regression, so this skewness actually does not mix the results a lot. Independent variable, public versus private sector. Again, there's a question in the European Social Survey where you have to mark which sector you belong. They do have government employees, they do have public sector health and education. They do have answers private sector. I excluded self-employees because it's a bit shaky area. So 30% of my observations are public sector employees, 70% are private sector employees, and this is how more or less average European employee looks like. Public sector, it's rather a woman, 66%, with 15 years of education, in her 45 more or less. She's not single, and she lives with 2 other people in her home, so the formula of household is you plus 2 other people. And establishment size, she works as around 55 people. Private sector, they're younger, 40 years old on average, usually male, 57%, however less educated, not single either, but still there are much more single people in private sector than in public, as we could see. Household formula is the same, and establishment size is usually smaller because of small and medium size of enterprises usually. So casual model, that's how I made my regression. All the public or private sector, and dependent variable, importance to be rich, importance to help others. Results. I'm not going to scare you with all these numbers just to show they are statistically significant for all country groups. So let's discuss briefly conclusions more or less for each particular hypothesis. So the results of my study prove that yes, public employees across all European countries value importance to help others much more than private counterparts. European Union funders have the smallest difference between public and private employees when we're talking about desire to help. What's interesting, Eastern Europe, namely Russia and Ukraine, has the largest difference between sectors in their attitudes to help. Meaning that, not that they want to help more, but there's a bigger difference. Those people working for public sector in Eastern Europe really value importance to help others a lot. Being a male, I'm sorry, I see a lot of male here, unfortunately it's negatively related to the importance to help others. And the least caring men are in Norway and Switzerland, while Eastern European men and women have the smallest difference. Again, it's not that they care more, but they have the smallest difference, gender difference between them. Each additional member of household increases your desire to help others, the actual practice at home, and go out and reach your society community. Very interesting here is the education, because the science of the coefficients are different, meaning that for some countries education is positively correlated, for some it's negatively correlated. And so what's interesting, so for these old, they call like Union founders and Switzerland, Norway, those rich countries, the more education you get, the more individualistic you become, the more abstracted you become from the society. While for developing countries, Central Eastern European countries and non-EU European countries, Russia, Ukraine, each year of education makes you more caring. These are numbers to prove it. I didn't invent it. Being rich. So again, results, hypothesis proved, public employees across all European countries indeed value wealth less than private sector. The least important wealth is for Switzerland and Norway. Norway, right? It's very simple because the salary sectors is not so drastically different. If you're a public employee, you get your money, so you shouldn't really care about it a lot. But also Eastern European countries. They have the same results for Switzerland, Norway, and Eastern European countries. The way I was trying to explain it was that those people, as we saw, they're on average 45 years old or something. So they got employed back in Soviet times when private sector does not exist. So it was actually this public service motivation that make you choose whether you want to go and work for the factory, for the production, or you want to be involved in society. You want to go and teach, you want to go and to the hospital, you want to go and be a city planner, this type of things. Again, men have higher importance for being rich, and especially the strongest one is in Western European countries and countries with single market. Wealth is less important to Eastern European men as compared to wealth to other countries. Education is positively related to importance to be rich, and the elder you are, the less important is wealth to you, which is pretty obvious too. You accumulate it anyways. Numbers to support it. So the conclusions of the whole presentation. Public source motivation is a concept designed in the United States, but this study proves that it actually could be generalized to other countries, at least for Europe as well. Intrinsic rewards are indeed more important for public employees in European countries than for private employees. Public employees care about money less. Eastern European countries show like extreme results in both questions, so we probably should look deeper there. Being rich, yeah, and there will be different reasons. I mentioned Norway and Eastern Europe. There will be different reasons why public employees will actually want to help or will value the money less. My favorite point here, so despite all these improvements with equal pay between men and women, despite all the movements, feminist movements, still true that men are those who care about money and women are those who care about others. So however equal we are, we're still different. So education have either positive or negative effect on your importance to care about others. And age, as already mentioned, actually reduce your desire to become rich. Maybe because you just simply become more wise. So on this wise note, our presentation.
Thank you very much. This actually says 5 minutes, so you had a few more minutes. So, okay. Well, we're very much on time, which is excellent, because then we'll have a good discussion. The last speaker is Dylan Roberts, who's a graduate in International Studies at Florida International University.
So first off, I'd like to begin by welcoming all of our Turkish colleagues here to Miami. I hope you're enjoying your visit so far, and I'd like to thank the center for putting this all on and for having me be a part of this. I really appreciate it. Since you said we're very on time, I will do my best to ruin that. No, I kid, of course. I'll do my best to keep it concise. So I guess I'll just get right into it. Basically, what my research is looking at is plausible options for spurring innovation in South America, and specifically through UNASUR, which is modeled on the EU, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. So, oh boy, I can't read that. My apologies. So, I guess I'm just going to have to wing it. Basically, what I'll say is that for those of you who don't know, I mean, of course, what is a trip without an obligatory talk about Latin America or South America, right? So, for those of you who don't know, the last decade has been, well, kind of unprecedented in terms of success and stability, economically and politically for the region, and it's, you know, it's been a time, I guess, kind of heady political days for a lot of policymakers, and frankly, it's been great. It's a goldmine for a lot of scholars like ourselves. So, you know, what you basically might be able to make out there is that, you know, the economies of South America all made it through the recession with relatively few problems, frankly, because they weren't as connected to the global financial system as the EU and the United States. And it actually turned out to be to their benefit. And thanks to China, on the other side of Russia from Belarus, I guess, you know, they all really, you know, did very well because of steady demand for resources, you know, natural resources, and of course agriculture. And in particular, you know, countries like Argentina, despite perhaps questionable methods of dealing with their own debt, seem to go along very smoothly thanks to this demand for agricultural products. Their soybean exports kept them afloat for quite a while, and we're only now starting to see that sort of recede. To that point, I would also say that Brazil, in the last year, surpassed the UK for the 6th largest GDP in the world. And their development bank there in Brazil holds an investment portfolio 3 times the size of that of the World Bank. The IMF forecasts that the region's economy will be growing by roughly 4% over the next 4 or 5 years, and as you guys can all see, that's a significant contrast with the United States and Europe, who, of course, are dealing with our own way of getting through the effects of the recession. So Chinese demand, of course, is going to still be there. There is, of course, a question about the nature of that demand. You know, as their society develops, what are they going to be needing? You know, and is South America, you know, positioned to provide those things that the Chinese will need, from the raw materials that help to construction to maybe now more value-added products. And of course, the downside of these last few years has been that, you know, sustaining GDP growth, you know, that is the next policy challenge for these people. The policymakers are looking at this and saying, well, we've done really well, we've gotten our stuff together, we've tamed the tiger of inflation. that stuff is a thing of the past. But how do we keep this going? So in their own internal analyses, they've all recently come to the same conclusions that the EU did recently. I guess, maybe less recently than South America did. That innovation would be key, would be absolutely crucial to sustaining any sort of successful trends they have. And they need to be prepared for the markets of the future, just like the EU. With that, one of the big identified lags that they have is in total factor production. So the amount of goods that you produce versus labor, capital, education, human skills, training, things like that. And a lot of economists are now saying that getting this part of the world to increase productivity has been something that they've forsaken for a long time, that has cost them something like 54% in per capita GDP increases over the last 50 years. And that is going to be what they really need to figure out if they want to keep this thing going. I guess this is kind of repeating what I just told you, so I'll move on. So the way to do this, the concept for a lot of these people is now, how do we prepare our citizens to compete? How do we make this region one where people will send high-end factories and want computers or something along those lines produced from here? Because education is a big problem there. So I guess what I would say is, since I can't read this, we can look to what the EU decided to do and look at that as a plausible policy model and room for further adoption for something that can grow innovation in the region and make this market competitive. So the EU in 2005 was in their midterm review of the Lisbon strategy, which is, I'm sure you all know much better than I do, was their economic growth strategy for the period of 2000 to 2010 in the EU. And in 2005, during that midterm review, they went through over 700 consultations with public figures, with private sector experts, and typical run-of-the-mill statistical consultants. And what they found that was keeping them from long-term sustainability in their eyes was a lack of capacity to innovate. And what they decided was that the areas that were keeping them from being able to innovate was not enough integration between the private sector and the public sector. That is, professors and graduate students such as ourselves doing research, and it stays within the confines of the academy. There's here in the United States, there's seen more of a sort of linear path for your research and things that take ideas to markets that make people rich. Another thing that they saw structurally as a problem was a lack of small to medium-sized enterprises. They identified this as kind of a lack of entrepreneurial spirit, that not enough Europeans were being taught that your ambitions academically should carry over to the professional world. And then finally, and we'll probably see these in repetition on a couple slides, and I can skip through those. With higher education, there were two systemic problems that they recognized. The first was not enough practical curriculum, not enough things that were training people for, within the European universities, training people for, I guess, for lack of a much better term, real jobs, or manufacturing, or high-skilled executive positions, or things like that. Then, of course, the other thing was there was not enough, as I've already mentioned, integration between the private sector and the universities. And what they saw was a lack of learning by doing sort of models. So the European Commission ended up preparing a budget to start what's called the EIT, or the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, to kind of counteract this problem. They saw it as integral to maintaining some sort of sustainable growth and keeping the EU in prime position as an economic competitor on the global scale. So I've already been through this. to do that, they have these specific transitions that the EIT focuses on within their mission. And those are making ideas into products, moving ideas from lab to market, and then turning students into entrepreneurs. They saw these transitions as essential to creating the workforce of tomorrow in Europe. To do so, they employ currently what are called knowledge and innovation communities, or KICs. And what those are is, I guess, independent centers where the criteria for the subjects they cover are that they, one, must have societal impact, high societal impact for Europe, and two, that the innovation that comes from these knowledge and innovation centers must lead to greater competitiveness for the European Union. It must have positive commercial results in the end. So what they did is they accepted several hundreds or maybe even thousands of proposals on what these kits should be focused on. The Commission and the Union, I guess, decided that the three issues they would begin with within their budget are climate change, information and communication technologies, and sustainable energy. And you see all the official names for them there. And what what those do is they bring together people from what's called the knowledge triangle, from the three fields of education and research and technology and business. And they try to get leaders together to put the best ideas in front of everybody and get results from innovating, right? So ideally, they'd be able to make significant inroads on things like climate change or sustainable energy, while at the same time preparing people with skills that matter for the workforce that's going to have to come along to keep Europe competitive. So, I guess the crux of this discussion, why not in South America? And the reason I should mention, that as kind of a caveat, I'm disaggregating South America from Latin America, which if any of you have tried to do so and find statistics or research, it's an incredibly difficult task. So sometimes the statistics are kind of fuzzy. But I did this because South America has specifically a regional institution called MEUCE, which I mentioned earlier, which is the Union of South American Nations. And that organization came about through the Cusco Declaration in Peru in 2004, where a lot of South American leaders, I think 8 or 9 at the time, decided that looking at the EU, they decided that this is what they wanted. They saw this as the pinnacle of regional integration, which for any of you who have any experience in Latin America, know that there is an alphabet soup of organizations that are trying to integrate the region and, I guess, create deeper political ties. But the importance of UNASUR is that in their original vision, and for the longest time while they were putting things together, the move towards a customs and monetary union was key. I mean, that is what they were aiming at. You don't see that as much with the larger ones. Obviously, you don't see that with OAS. CELAC is just getting off the ground, and we'll, basically what I'll say is discussing the institutional viability of all the other ones and whichever ones are competing. It's not for me to say. I'm not here to make a value judgment on their odds for success, because frankly that would be a whole other paper and a much longer presentation, and I'm sure you guys wouldn't want that. So, the important thing about this, about UNASUR, is that they also recently decided to kind of shed the education and culture side of technology, science, and innovation and create an independent institution last November called the CSCTI, I guess would be the acronym, but basically it is just focused on science, technology, and innovation. I look at this as an opportunity for kind of nipping something in the bud, right? Catching it in the gestational phase and making a plausible recommendation for what this body might look like, what its outputs might be in the future. So, this is just a background on that. The things I basically told you. They did freeze, although they didn't, shut it down completely. They did freeze the movement towards monetary and customs union in June of 2011 at the height of course, the Euroscepticism. So we'll see how that goes in the future. But I'd like to strike an optimistic note, and I'm hopeful that this Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation can do do some more looking to the EU as its larger organization does, parent organization, I guess. So what I say is that, in my research, is that since we've identified that a lack of productivity growth is what is really stifling South America from competing with the likes of parts of Asia, North America, and Europe, I recommend that they take on the EIT strategy because they have similar deficiencies and they also have they've shown an institutional willingness to adopt foreign ideas, right? So obviously, since UNASUR was specifically modeled on the EU, and this is not my own inference, I figure why not model this and these outputs on what the EU is doing. So the other problem, of course, is that when dealing with developing regions, you always have this sort of pitfall that people come across, where a one policy fits all process goes on, where, hey, this worked here in the United States or in Canada or Switzerland or Norway, so it'll probably do just fine in Argentina or Nigeria. I want to make it extremely clear that is not where I'm going with this. What I am saying, though, is that the EIT model can be adapted to face the challenges that keep South America's competitiveness from growing. And you see here that crime and pandemic violence, poor infrastructure, environmental degradation, and education beyond the primary level, and bureaucratic problems of either corruption or kind of overbearing government institutions. Those are still very real problems for South America that in many ways the EU has long since tamed. But I advocate the use of the KIC model because not only do you have the opportunity to face those challenges and get valuable skills that will help create a smarter workforce and a better government, right? By teaching people the value in changing the culture of corruption. You'll be breeding a whole new group of people that will be ready to compete, and also allow other people the opportunities to gain the skills that would help them to compete. So basically what I'm saying is the way to do this would be, instead of having a KIC, like recognizing political and budget limitations, instead of having a KIC for each one of those issues, and then growing this problem of institutional bloat that we've already identified exists, why not try to find something that can affect all of those and have a positive impact on all of those issues, while helping the greatest majority of Latin America's citizens, or South America in this case. As you guys can see, 80% of future economic growth in Latin America is expected to come from its urban areas, and 80% of the population of the region live in urban areas, and it's projected to be 90% by 2050. As you guys are probably aware, that is an astounding number, and it certainly leads the world. So what I'm recommending is a KIC for urban policy. I'm saying that in a region with so few success stories in taming these largely urban problems, it might not be a bad idea to bring in the mayors who have had success, and as you guys can see here, there aren't tons of specifics, but there have been some, a lot of urban policy wonks might very well recognize some of these cases. But the point is there have been cases of success, and people like those should probably be socializing the ideas that they had to tame these problems that have plagued the region for decades, and in some cases centuries. So the other, of course, aspect of this is adding institutional legitimacy. Aside from creating a model for good governance for a region that needs it, and that could benefit everyone at every level, you've also got the institutional legitimacy that's added by having UNASUR be responsible for making people's lives better and making them better able to compete in the market of the future. And also, with respect to budgetary concerns, you can do this all under one umbrella. I think to have mercy on our moderator, I think I'll just conclude there and say that I hope that this can be seen as possible. And thank you for your time, everybody. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you to our speakers for being so on time, partly because they're being harassed. And also, I think the three papers fit together very nicely. towards work, towards wealth, towards issues that relate to innovation and economic success. And I think they've also brought in not only Europe, but also we've brought in other regions such as South America. And I think this is very important that all of these elements are brought together in our discussion, because there are many lessons to learn. I mean, for instance, in India, the Tata Corporation actually built the Bangalore Institute of Technology. And so you have a private company actually building one of the engines of technical advance and innovation that has spurred India's success, economic success. And the Japanese have also taken interesting, despite their very organized culture, they have recognized that the kind of American innovative communities coming out of places like Berkeley with a slightly anarchic style, they have copied that and created like little mini Berkeley innovation centers in Japan that are not expected to run on the rules of Japanese everyday decor and control. So that there are many lessons to be learned around the world about the way in which innovation can be spurred, and the way in which many of the ideas are connected globally. They come from different places. So just to set a kind of backdrop, I welcome questions to our three excellent presenters.
Sure.
Do you have to go to there?
No problem.
Or I think the acoustics in here seem very good.
Yeah, I can just ask my
I think
question.
we can probably be more spontaneous.
Sure, yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you very much for a great opening, everybody. That was really good, and I'm glad to have FIU also represented here. When we were conceiving of that, and it's just a general comment and then some questions to, I think, all of you. When we were conceiving of the conference, we wanted to have the first panel focused on, as you can see here, labor economic development initiatives, programs aiming to increase economic competitive and job creation. So we were looking really more at the private sector, because we have a public sector panel later in the day, but somehow I guess you cannot take the public sector out of innovation or job creation or whatever it may be. Maybe it's just the way we found the US speakers. So that's my comment. I'm in the questions that I have to you, because the public sector in Europe is of course very important, and still there also takes up a lot of the national budgets and so on and so on. So for Marielle, thanks for your presentation. I was wondering if basically the national level decided to various degrees, right, to do a subnational decentralization, thereby giving the regions, the subnational regions, more power. Also in the use of EU funds, right? Is that seen by the EU as a sort of structural opportunity structure, right? Where they can maybe immerse themselves more in appealing directly to the region? Because overall there seems to be a fragmentation in Europe of the nation states going on. So I'm wondering, does it lead to an increased weakening of the states and the EU and the regions playing together more? For Palina, very good presentation. I'm wondering also, exactly because the public sector is under such heavy pressure nowadays, right? With budget cuts, with austerity, all these things. What do your results really mean for public sector development across the European states, which have to cut back in many countries significantly, right? And lay off, thousands of people. Okay, so the larger picture, if you can give us a little bit of that. And for Dylan, maybe a very good presentation. Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, the organization of cities, that's very clear, particularly, your prognostication of how many people are in South America and Europe being such an urbanized space. I'm just wondering also, what about the, Latin America being so rich in natural resources? And these are, non-urban, usually non-urban, right, lead to a lot of, mining, whatever, agriculture, biotrade, whatever that may be. How is the relation, how do you see the non-urban development chances for, Latin America and UNASUR as opposed to your emphasis on cities? Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll let since we have three questions, really nice and balanced. Want to let some replies and then we'll have another. Okay, so they don't forget. I'll just run down in order. Sorry. That's the
First
reply.
question over here.
So regarding the question, I think that's a general dynamic of the ESF that is not only related to decentralization, because when I did the first round of interviews in 2003 for my dissertation, I already saw that, and that was previous to decentralization, right? So I think in general, the resources provided by the ECF always provide more discretion to the subnational level if they have the opportunity to apply on their own, not through the national level. And in terms of the hollowing out of the state, I don't think so. I think that's one of the conclusions of the book, because you only have, in the case of the United States and Italy, that the central level is not really there, but still it is there through financial resources. And even in the United States, the United States use these sticks and carrots type of incentives to have the states implement work for healthcare, right? So it's not that the states are working on their own. They have to work with more discretion in some places than others, right? But so that's why I think it's important to think in terms of maybe decentralization within centralization, or not think about decentralization as being as a unidirectional process, because it's a balancing out in which one level of government gets more power, but the other one is trying to hold that power back. So it's kind of a struggle, right? So
And then the role of the EU in that process, is there?
in
She's running out of time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
in what process? In the hollowing out, or?
Yeah, in that struggle, between the national level and the subnational level, and how they use, EU funds, for example.
As I said, it's not new. It's not related to decentralization. I think that's just a dynamic that has been created by the EUCE.
Yeah, so repeat question again. So what does my result mean for public sector development? Very simple. The result shows that we do have proper people in public sector. So we need to trust them. They will act in order to help us develop. They are not interested in just get more money and build a new I don't know, 4-level mansion or Maserati. Of course, it's always cool when it's on the site, right? So the recommendation will be do not introduce or do not stress introduction of monetary incentives for public employees and government officials. Do not. Rather give them more freedom to act. Again, a decentralization thing, and they will do their job.
And forgive me, please, Dr. Taylor, do you mind repeating that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically, in terms of comparability between Latin America and the EU, since, of course, both are highly urbanized, but in Latin America it's very natural resource rich, right? And so there's increased, with mining, with biotrade development, all these things, there seems to be a focus on urban as well as the natural resources in Latin American development, but that's not transferable necessarily to the EU, because the EU doesn't have all that many natural resources. So I was wondering if you want to comment on that.
Oh, wow.
See the
Okay.
problem with that.
Like stuff the panelists. No, what I would say is that with the I guess the complementarity of that, right? For Latin America, despite its I guess dependence economically on in a lot of ways, or a lot of cases, I should say, on agricultural resources or natural resources, mining, things like that. Surprisingly, even countries that do so well through, say, soybean exports, or in the case of Colombia, gold, coffee, emeralds, etc., they still are primarily, urban-run economies. As far as translating that to the EU, all I would say is that I think that in the case of South America, you could get away with prioritizing, not ignoring certainly the problems, the very real problems of rural development there in South America, but you could get away with prioritizing urban and having that kind of trickle down. That's really not the term I'll use, sorry. But have that work out for the agricultural sectors. In the case of the EU, I'm not sure that you have the same sort of balance that you have to worry about. so I'm not totally clear on really the necessity of I guess, like trying to strike that balance for the EU. I'm not, I hope I'm answering your question. I hadn't thought about that in the way that you posed it, so I apologize.
So we'll take about 3 questions. I'll start here.
Okay, thank you all, by the way, very much for a stimulating panel. I have a very small question for Marielle and a very large question. Sorry. All right, Marielle, I'm just curious who you're interviewing. So, okay, because it didn't say. For Palina, now you have to remember I'm a historian, so I'm coming from a very different kind of disciplinary perspective, but I hear your fascinating presentation and I'm thinking to myself, like, how can we assume this absolute dichotomy between the public and the private sector? How can we assume that they mean the same thing in a variety of contexts? What about things like kind of larger social and cultural environments, so specific to each place that you're thinking about, specifically because you're thinking about Eastern Europe versus not Eastern Europe, the rest of Europe, like I'm a Russian historian, so I think a lot about, kind of post-communism and all of that, and the impact that has on precisely kind of notions of, say, public service and what that means in the context of a post-communist society versus a not post-communist society. It makes a big difference, I would guess. Also, the dichotomy itself, so I'm thinking about the rich lawyer who does things pro bono. Guess what? That rich lawyer might not be only motivated by money. That rich lawyer might care a lot about the world and is a do-gooder too. Or what about academics who happen to get jobs in private versus public universities? What about kind of the shape of labor markets and how they determine these things, not just motivated by one's do-gooder nature or kind of desire to or greed, which is kind of how you pose it. I know I'm being harsh, but I just found it so stimulating and fascinating, so I'm just going to say everything I thought of. And also in terms of the gender dynamic, there too, like, is it really shocking that men care more about money? They're still meant to be the breadwinners, even in the 21st century. I mean, we know that, right? We try hard to fight against that, but in the end, that kind of, again, cultural and social norm remains so incredibly strong that the kind of motivation, I wouldn't call it greed, but maybe responsibility. And I'm a feminist like anyone else, so I think that's not a good thing in some ways, but on the other hand, it is the societies in which we live, and so I think that should be a factor in your analysis, right? Kind of understanding the meanings of gender. And also, by the way, of course, those meanings of gender responsibility are so different in post-communist societies, right? I know I'm asking too many questions. All right, we can talk more about it over lunch, but thank you.
Right, okay. So now I'm going to collect another 2 questions.
Can I just jump in and follow up on what
Okay,
Rebecca said?
for students.
One dimension of what was parts of your, or should have been part of your hypothesis when you formulated it, is the aspect of job security. I guess they're from the labor market angle, but this aspect is very important in the public sector motivation for employees, so maybe you want to capture that in some time.
Yes, of course.
And then we have a question here.
Sure. Actually, I enjoyed all the presentations, obviously. I guess I could have 3 questions. So the first question I wanted to ask is from Dylan. I thought it was very interesting your idea of trying to apply a European model to South America. In the Department of Public Administration where I'm teaching, we have an institute for basically public citizenship that specifically deals with Latin America. In fact, we have a mayor's conference. Yeah, we have that. It's been going on for about 13 years. I would invite you to, obviously come over to public administration, and if you're interested in, in going to the conference, because it's held here in Miami every year, and there are actually specifically local mayors, regional officials, that kind of thing. So my question to you is, how do you think you could apply this KIC model to Latin America, specifically at the local level?
Well, what I would say, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, you said you had questions for all 3?
Oh yeah, I do, yes. So I didn't know, okay, and then for Marielle, I thought your presentation was very interesting, especially in terms of the use of the European Structural Fund. I'm going to present a paper in Serbia in a couple of months that deals with comparative emergency management. In particular, the EU's coordinating function during natural disasters, and how all of them basically essentially ascribe to this particular fund, but a lot of the money is provided from the European Structural Fund, and the more disasters there are, obviously the less money there is. So my question to you is, how do you think that the use of this money, for example, is going to be, I guess you might say, different in the next couple of years, given the fact that we seem to have an increasing tempo of natural disasters? It's not like we have one or two. It seems like there are multiple disasters every year. So that's obviously going to tax the environment. Tax the fund itself. And then for Palina, obviously, I wanted to know, in particular in terms of your public service motivation, do you believe that this is going to change, like in the next 5 or 10 years, considering that we have, at least in the United States, we have a lot of people retiring from the public sector? Tens of thousands of government officials are retiring from the public sector in the United States. Do you think that the same thing is going to happen in Europe?
Okay, I think that we are going to, we'll reply to this round of questions, and we'll start with Dylan and then work down.
Okay. Well, first off, I appreciate the invite, really, because I've seen that come up a couple times, and I do find that really interesting. My thesis work actually revolves around the Bogota case from the turn of the century. Answering your question, the way I would apply that at the local level, or in my mind, the best way for that to work at the local level would be employing something that I didn't get a chance to explain very thoroughly during the presentation. Basically, what the EIT does is they have what are called co-location centers, and they have 17 of them spread across Europe. Of course, South America is a vast continent. There's no question about that. But the way I guess I would apply that same sort of model would be maybe to say have one of these co-location centers spread out in quite a few major cities around the region. From there, hopefully, outreach would be at least feasible, even into the smaller cities, areas, as far down as Ushuaia or something like that. So ideally, it would work on that sort of same principle, being able to spread out and then have them all be connected through institutional communication.
Regarding Rebecca's question, I'm co-authoring this with Milena Brooks, who is at the University of Southampton, and she collected the data for Germany and the UK. But in terms of who did we interview, everyone. We did interviews with experts, with scholars, with, even in Spain, I interviewed a former minister for labor market policies, big person. But also we did interviews at the local level with people who were not the ones that delivered the policies, but the ones that were in charge for organizing the offices, for instance. So we did interviews at different levels with different type of actors. And regarding the ESF, I have to be honest, and I'm completely have no idea about the dimension that you're referring to. I know that from the perspective of labor market policy is an important aspect, but probably Valerie can tell you more about emergency because I don't know.
Perfectly okay. We don't have any experts on that.
No.
So about the economy of public and private sector, so it's trichotomy anyway, it's public, private, and non-profit. I'm not talking here about non-profit. My dissertation is about difference between non-profit and public and motivation of those two. So why I would still insist on this dichotomy in my presentation. And in Europe, we do, in continental Europe, we do have pretty strong welfare systems as compared to the United States. We do have these public schools, we do have public hospitals at work, and sometimes in Denmark, let's say, maybe even free for charge, even for foreigners. So there are different people working in different organizations. Rich lawyer is a perfect metaphor. I'll keep it for the next presentations. Exactly Switzerland and Norway. They do have money, of course they care, they're educated, but they also want help. So the main point here, I do not oppose wealth to helping others. There are two parallel dimensions that I measure. I don't say that those who care for money more care about others less. I just look across different countries how they care about people and how how they consider the importance of wealth. So these results are based on this observation, more or less. Controlling for job security is very important, but again, there are different types to assess public service motivation. The way I did here is over-reliance on intrinsic over extrinsic rewards. So job security is part of it, but there's other way to assess PSM, and then they actually have job security in a lot of studies control for job security. In this particular study, I think they do have European Social Survey does have a question about job security, but it's very objective. Definitely worth to just to add this one variable in the whole study. But I doubt it will drastically change the picture.
Okay, some more questions here? Start with you.
Right, I have also one question for each. For Marielle. So you're describing this model of administrative centralization, and then fiscal and political centralization. And so, first of all, I wanted to ask, is it the description of reality, or is it the prescription about how things should be? So is it the normative, or is it an observation? But in whatever the answer is that a sustainable model? So I understand that it may work for practical purposes, but do some political systems tend to have a tendency to move more towards a unitary model, some more towards a federal model? So anything that is in between as that model that you're suggesting, I don't know if it's permanent or if it's just a phase to something else. Okay, so because it sounds very good in theory, but I suspect that over time, regional governments may want to take over, administrative fiscal responsibilities, or the central government might want to do that. So I'm not sure how sustainable that is. Well, it may be, but. And for Palina, so it seems to me, and I'm trying to sort of get the main argument. What you're saying is that it's the reason for these regional differences between these different groups of countries is in some way human nature, right? So it's gender, it's culture, it's what people want to do. But then if it's human nature, what is and I could be wrong about that, what are the policy implications of that? So what can governments do to influence people's motivation? Okay, is there a policy prescription in there? What kind of incentives can you give to men who are selfish to be more public, more spirited, something like that? And for Dylan, and that's my last question on this, and it's probably the simplest question is, so I understand that South America is using the EU as a model, it's imitating the European Union, and that happens with other parts of the world as well. But my question is, does the EU is actively encouraging that kind of cooperation? Because I'm aware that the EU has specific funds in place to encourage this kind of regional integration. And I'm not sure if you said that, I just didn't get it. My understanding is that the EU is sort of leading is an example. There's this example that's being imitated as opposed to the EU helping out. So it could be sometimes, for example, there would be expertise that's given by the Commission or EU institutions to a regional group or funds to develop certain structures. So I don't know if you saw that at all.
Okay, last question.
Yes, thank you. It was so interesting that I had plenty of questions. But I'll just like to start with Dylan. And it will be from a project that came from Europe, which was about the city culture of the year, which is basically one project. And how this project can be an impact of developing the city and an impact on all the different levels of the city itself, from the poor to the more expensive, or more rich people. It's also the same question will go from the same project on how the movements coming from Europe can be, I'm talking about France because these days it's Marseille, which has been words that finally what is important is who gets the power means who gets the money. Is the money going straight from the top down, or can it just come directly down and just on the regional area? That's always the question, because not so much to cut, always in different pieces, and that process being for years from regions to centralization, and history is telling us all that. So this is one thing. And then I go on the third one, still on the same, and asking how can you make private and public involved now in the same direction and not departing them completely separated, but in fact making them working together in innovation.
Excellent. This time we'll go from Palina down towards Dylan, and then we will reward ourselves with coffee.
Alright, so let myself start with the last question. How to involve public and private go in the same direction? It's already taking place. You know, a number of public-private partnerships, and they do a lot of projects. So they're working towards it, and especially in Europe. I know cases from Germany, but I'm sure it's everywhere. Incentives, how to make this man work, that or recommendation to the man who's monitoring, motivated to help people, just change the job. I mean, it will be more rewarding for you to work for the private sector then, and you will make more difference in this sector than going to public. And I'm saying this seriously, because let's say in South Korea, in public sector, human resource departments, they do have a public service motivation test for each person before they hire. So they look, if you do not fit this, picture, why should you get the job?
But what about media?
Media?
We have no one's talked about media, social media, as a pressure to get people to think differently.
I'll think about it.
We'll talk about it.
That's the next question.
In terms of the model and differentiation, well, I take this over from the literature, but surprisingly, when I was interviewing people and I was reading the documents, these different types hold in reality, because for instance, when you interview people in Spain, they will tell you, we're responsible for the administration, but the central level is responsible for the political and fiscal. Or when you look at constitutional change in Italy, you say the regions gain exclusive competency over political and administrative matters. So, of course, it's a function of the legal framework of a state. So that kind of influences that, but I think it's a very accurate depiction of the way things work. Regarding whether institutions matter to understand the nature and the extent, surprisingly, that was one of the main findings. They don't matter. You can see that in the United States is a federal entity. In Germany, you see centralization. In the United States, you see decentralization. I actually published a paper that I compare Spain and Italy, because both of them are regionalized countries, but they have completely different systems. The UK, you will assume that Scotland and exactly, you will ask for more autonomy, but they haven't, because the framework is that everyone should be exposed to the same rights and obligations across the territory. So, yeah, it is very interesting, and also it's independent from welfare regimes as well.
Okay, we'll give Dylan the last word.
Thank you. And thank you both for your questions. I suppose I should start with your question about EU integration with the regional institutions in Latin America. It seems to me that they have picked a horse, and that horse is CELAC. So the EU, which is for those of you who are not familiar, it's the institution that comprises all of Latin America and the Caribbean and excludes the United States and Canada. So all of this continent but those two. And the European Union has actually gone to great lengths in relative terms, of course, gone to great lengths to coordinate with them and actually specifically work on innovation, but a lot through the academic side of things. So they're trying to I guess institutionally make sure that professors are getting together and having conferences and talking about technology sharing and of course these important things. What I would also say though is that I think from a strategic perspective, and please correct me where anyone might think I'm wrong, from an EU perspective I would say that it seems to me that incorporating all of that region rather than just UNASUR or just CARICOM or any of the other regional organizations probably seems like a better idea for your money. I'm glad you asked that question because I'm going to look a little more into UNASUR and EU relations specifically on innovation. And regarding your question now, the Cultural City of the Year program, I believe is the one you're referring to. And when I was last over in Europe, it was Liverpool. And gratuitous football mention, I'm a huge Liverpool supporter, so it was wonderful for me to see what it did for that city, to get people in Europe to pay attention to a city that had, for a long time, kind of, whiled away, much like our steel cities here in the United States do. One that for so long depended on textiles and exportation. So yes, in terms of revival of the city, and in terms of getting those mayors in those cities to be on their P's and Q's and get everything right and put the infrastructure together to hold visitors and instill a sense of pride. Absolutely, that program has a lot of room for growth, I believe, in South America. And specifically in Colombia, I know that Bogota has won twice a similar sort of distinction from UNESCO. But within the regional level, I'm not certain as to whether or not UNASUR has adopted. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think maybe I've forgotten to add one. You also talked about Europe and USA, and I think that we might be, and this is something that personally I don't have the answer to, so I just asked it. It's basically how to incorporate also the sister cities that has been, and especially for example in Florida, it's also something in the ports and not just the city, but there are a lot of different links already, and that's a way of fluid making different information and cooperation.
Really integrating the metropole.
Integrating in this kind of project.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to cut into our coffee and not have any. I want us a round of applause for
Thank you all so much. Let me say, I noticed on the program that there actually is a full half hour between now and the next. Let's agree that we'll start about 10 or 15 minutes early so we have more time for lunch. Okay?
Thank you. So maybe if you can be back at, exactly
10
to 10 to 11. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get our priorities straight here.